This is Gaslit, the power of story. I'm Tommy Hausman. In this series, we've been talking to the people living inside Indiana's affordability crisis. Families staring down impossible utility bills, small businesses wondering if they can keep the lights on, and community leaders trying to hold everything together while the systems around them fail. Today, we're talking with someone who lives at the intersection of all of that. My guest is Cindi Clayton, an instructor at the University of Southern Indiana, a longtime advocate for children and survivors of abuse through her work with the Holly's House, and now a candidate for the Indiana State Senate. Cindi grew up the daughter of a union coal miner, lost her mom to cancer as a child, and was raised by community, especially public school teachers who saw her, believed in her, and pushed her forward. She's now watching her own students do everything right, get the degree, work the internship, land the job, and still not be able to afford a life in Evansville. In this conversation, we talk about what it really means to live under a utility monopoly, how state-level decisions have quietly drained public schools and child protection systems for years, why she refuses to take a single dollar from energy companies, and what servant leadership should look like in practice, not as a slogan. This is a story about bills and budgets, but it's also a story about kids, safety, dignity, and what we owe each other in a state that calls itself pro-family. Let's get into it.
So, Cindi, welcome to Gaslit, the power of story. I'd like to start off with what your why is. So, you've been very clear about why you're running, especially around affordability and accountability. For listeners who may be meeting you for the very first time, what is the core why behind your campaign?
Okay, thank you for having me and for the question. The core why is I teach at USI, and I have for the last 11 years. And quite often my students become my kids. I call them my kids, even when they're 30 years old. I love them dearly and quite often become part of their life. And I've noticed over the last few years, specifically the last year, the May graduates, my students couldn't, even though they came to a school that is affordable, and they worked the internships and they got good grades, they did everything right, and they got a job paying $50,000, they couldn't afford to live in Evansville. They wanted to stay, but they had to go back to their hometown because they had to go back to live with their parents. And we are losing talent because of this. Yeah. So when it comes to, paying your own rent, food, utilities, perhaps even with a roommate, it's not the same situation as, when I graduated from USI in 99, I was able to buy a house. And I understand times change and everything is different, but our graduates who make good decisions should be able to live independently. And we want to retain as much of that talent here in Evansville as possible.
I've been saying that the job of a city is much like the job of a college. You want to recruit, retain, and then thrive. And our city just doesn't seem to be doing that right now because of some of the decisions that we've made. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us just a little bit more about what you do and what else you're involved in and what you're bringing to the table?
Yeah. So a little bit more backstory. I have lived in Indiana all my life, except for 1 year I worked at the nuclear plant in Paducah. And it's interesting because I was there on 9/11. Oh, wow. And as the fighter jets were flying overhead, as I was standing on, millions of tons of uranium, I decided Evansville was home and I wanted to go home. But I was born in Terre Haute. My dad was a union coal miner and my mom stayed home. And then my mom got sick with cancer when I was about 11. I started helping to take care of her, not because they necessarily made me, but because it made me feel good to do something. It made me feel like I could help make her better, and have some control over the situation. And so at the same time, my mom was dying, the mine shut down, or it was shutting down. And so we moved, my mom died, and there were people in the community that stepped up to take care of me. So I was parented by community, and specifically my public school teachers. And so even when I was in elementary school, they knew mom was sick, and they tried their very best to give me a normal life. And all my life, I have felt a responsibility to give some of that energy back, because it put me in a place where I could reach my full potential, and I could really live my dreams. And I know that sounds a little corny, but it's true. And then on top of that, I was able to thrive in public school because of my public school teachers. And at that time, you could still get scholarships to state schools, which you really can't anymore. My daughter graduated from SIG in 21 as a valedictorian, and the scholarships were paltry. So I got a full ride to USI. And so USI then became the place where I was cared for and nurtured. And people were telling me, hey, you have talent and abilities, and you can do this, and supporting me. And so again, it was a new community that was raising me. And so again, I felt a responsibility to give that back. So then it was actually after the nuclear plant fiasco that I began teaching as an adjunct at USI and working in their HR department. And I'd worked in HR for several years before that. And I realized that this was my home, and I wanted to stay here. And part of it was because I was doing something that mattered. The students thriving, even though I was in HR, and so I was hiring the faculty and staff that cared for those students, but I was still part of the process. And it gave me a lot of good. I felt like I was making a contribution beyond just cashing a paycheck. So my dream when I was 19, I coming from these small Indiana towns, and, with my mom and dad being high school graduates, I didn't even know what a college professor was. And this class, I took Psychology 201, and I teased that my first love was a 70-year-old chain-smoking woman named Sue Donaldson. And it's part stand-up comedy and part mom, dad, parent, nurturing, and part pushing of young people to reach their potential. And I was starry-eyed, and I was like, I want to do that. Yeah. But I didn't have the resources. And so again, working in HR at USI meant that I got a free education. I was able to get my master's degree, and now I get to teach in the College of Business. And so I really get to realize that. Another really great thing about that arrangement is, because I'm an instructor and not tenured or tenure track, I'm expected to do a certain amount of community service. And so I get to choose what that is. And so in 2015, I chose to join the Holly's House board. So for people who don't know, Holly's House is a children's advocacy center here in Evansville. That phrase always trips me up. And what we do is do child abuse prevention education in the schools of our 8-county region that we serve. We try to promote justice for children who are victims of physical, sexual abuse. They come in to be interviewed as part of the legal process. And then now we have in-house mental health services that help to heal the child and the family, the non-offending caregiver as well. And so being part of that board, I've been part of the leadership of the board for the last 5 years, and I've been the board chair for the last 2 years.
Amazing.
And so I'm really proud of the work we've been able to do there. We've made huge strides, and despite the obstacles, I'm sure that we'll talk about shortly that have come our way. So I'm really delighted by having the opportunity to serve our community in that way. There's a little bit of a technical issue since we're on live.
Yeah, there's always something.
It's always something, yeah, for sure. That's, one of the bad things about going live. But you guys are awesome.
So I know exactly what has happened. There's been so many podcasts recorded on this computer that there's no more disk space. So if you don't mind, since we're going live and we're doing it, maybe we'll re-record or something, or work it for it. We'll just keep going like that, like nothing happened.
Yes, I'm here for it.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. And I do have other sources of audio. We'll see what I can do.
Okay.
All right. So now you are going to run for state senate. So you said that oversight system meant to protect ratepayers, that it's failing. And so now you're going to run. Can you tell us about how this ties in to why you're running and just like kind of reiterate how we got here?
Yeah. So it is one of my top 3 issues. And so we all know that we have a utility monopoly here in Evansville, and Indiana can either operate their utilities as a monopoly or a REMC. And so we, for whatever reason, have a monopoly. And we have recently had rate hikes that are sometimes sometimes the bills are doubled. Sometimes they're tripled. We also have a lot of homes that are not weather efficient. And so while we have some extreme temperatures here in this community, it's very difficult to have efficiency on your usage, your kilowatt hour usage. And so we have this monopoly, and the Friedman economics, to be a little teachery, is that a corporation's only moral obligation is to serve its shareholders, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that piece where it's a for-profit entity. We also have a monopoly in our state government, and have had for at least the last 15 years. And that means that we have the same party ruling in the governor's mansion and in the state house and in the Senate. So what that gives us is no accountability unless a critical mass of the same party senators or representatives have some sort of a deep conscience about their ratepayers.
That'd be nice.
That would be nice. And it's human nature, perhaps, to maybe think, oh, how far can I slip by on some of these things? And so there are incentives, obviously, for politicians. And that's not unique to Indiana. It's not unique to the people that we're, looking at challenging here in southwestern Indiana. There are campaign contributions. But in that when you look that up, that's quite small. But there's this whole other lobbyist activity, which is entertainment and meals and travel, that are not only for the senator or representative, but for their whole family. And so it doesn't pay much. You have to be away from home. It's not a highly desirable thing. And so I think one could easily wrap their mind around, well, I'm taking these perks because this is hard work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And no one will really pay attention. And I think that's true. We have not been paying attention.
Yeah.
Our voter turnout and our collaboration with our legislators, we've been asleep at the wheel, we citizens.
Yeah.
And it had to come to a point where we're all staring down disaster. And I'll call out myself. For me to step up and go, this is really hard work, but I have to do it because somebody has to, and I'm positioned to do it. And so that's sort of, I think, how we got here was not paying attention, death by 1,000 cuts, and lots of years of well, we can add this fee. We'll let you add this fee. We'll let you add this fee. We'll let you do this. And nobody's paying attention until there's a crisis.
Right. And I think we're definitely in a crisis now. I think most people don't even, and until recently, there's been an effort by several groups to educate the public about how our rates get increased through legislation and through the IURC. But until recently, if you said IURC to anyone, I don't think they would know what you were talking about. So can you talk a little bit about what it is that you'll be doing and how that's different from like what Sally will be doing or from what Alex does or Logan? And can you say what you'll do on day one?
Okay. That's a very loaded question. So the Senate, it really the legislature model is very much like the federal, where there are 50 senators representing different regions that are drawn based on the once a decade census. And then there are representatives that represent smaller groups, and bills that have money attached, money attached to them go through the House, just like in the federal government. So right now, there are 40 senators in one party and 10 in another. So when I'm looking at just the Senate, there's no meaningful representation of a minority group. And by minority group, I just simply mean everybody has, parties have their sets of priorities, and frankly, parties kind of each have their, I don't say necessarily like overlords, but like, their causes and the things that they prioritize. And so that drowns out what others may want. Now, we do have some representatives and senators who are much more moderate, but again, they're not in the majority and they're not aligned with our current governor. Our current governor is not a moderate. He's very, very far in ideology in one direction.
Yes.
And so that and combined with a legislature that is complicit and aligns as well with that same sort of vision leaves many of us voiceless. Because I think if you went, like when I go door knocking, granted, I'm not knocking on doors of somebody that's got, a Trump flag in the front yard, but most of our friends, family, and neighbors are very moderate.
Yeah.
We have a few outliers, that are this side or the other.
Can we actually just break down talking to about the issues?
Yeah, talk about the issues. We kind of all agree. Yeah. And that isn't in line with what's happening in Indianapolis today.
Right.
That's so we've got an alignment problem with the average voter.
All right, so you win.
Day one. Okay, day one. Okay. So so day one, if I were to take a job today as a director of an organization, there has to be a listening tour part. It is foolish to start something this important with, your ideas ablazing on day one and go, it's my way or the highway, right? So there will be a period of time of listening. I have already, as I talk to voters and some of the things that are important to our constituents, there are bills that I have in mind that I already want to craft. And so if I were to be elected, I would find like-minded senators, because being brand new, being a junior senator, there is a pecking order.
Yeah.
And I'm not foolish enough to think that I'll come in and solve everybody's problem on day one. But like Senator J.D. Ford from Indianapolis, for example, we align on child protection, which, we'll get into in a little bit, and, just kind of leaving people alone issue. And so I will listen to his counsel. We have already started some conversations, and Shelley Yoder, who is the Senate Minority Speaker. And so there are some things that were very unpopular that were passed in the last couple of years that we will introduce bills to counter.
All right, I like that answer. Coming to the table with a ready to learn,
ready to learn, and with the coalition.
Yeah.
And it's important. It's really cool that we have all stepped up, Sally and Logan and Mary and me, we've all stepped up so that we can start building relationships now with the folks in Indianapolis.
So with how we've set this up and some previous statements that you've made, you've made a very direct comment to refuse all funding from energy companies. Why was that a non-negotiable line for you?
Yeah. So people all my life that have known me, like some of you, like my cousin Brooke, hi Brooker, is watching me, and she's known me. I've known her since the day she was born, and she knows that I am dogged in my yeses and nos, and that I cannot be bought. I have enough education and experience to be an executive somewhere. So if I cared about money a long time ago, I would have climbed a corporate ladder. But what drives me is service. It's like a drug to me. You do understand, yeah. And so I cannot compete with my opponent who has run unopposed the last 2 elections, who has a pile of cash and also special interest blank checks.
Yeah.
And so that's okay. What I plan to do is to tackle things a different way, meeting voters, going door to door, being at events, being open to talking to voters. And so the only money that I will take is individual donations and money from labor unions. I strongly believe, again, I was raised UMWA, and I strongly believe that not only do I believe in labor unions, but I believe this sort of loneliness epidemic issue. A lot of that can be solved by good union jobs for young men and women, because labor unions are like family. I grew up on the playground at Plumbers and Steamfitters in Terre Haute. My dad played on a softball team with the other, coal miners. And when I walked in the Labor Day parade with the labor unions, people were pushing strollers. It's a whole family, and it's a dynamic where it's its own community, and it's constant training. And in order for us, I think, as human beings to be fulfilled, we've got to be moving forward. And labor unions really provide that. So I digress about that point, but I just want to hammer home how important that is to me. And there are small businesses that I would take money from, but I will not be bought by corporate money. That's not why I'm doing this. This is basically my time of service at Holly's House is coming to a close after a decade. New ideas need to come in, and it's a new day. And so transferring that service to the state is my wish and my goal. And then that will also be on a timeline, because my husband is nearing retirement, and we love travel. And so I will retire from USI when it's my time. He works at USI too. And that my service will be done, and I will be actively trying to recruit and train someone to run next with a similar heart for service.
Wow. You got a plan.
I got a plan.
Right on.
Oh, I've always got a plan.
So you talked a little bit about education in public schools. So you've stated that restoring public school funding is one of your top priorities. Mm-hmm. So what are the most urgent consequences you're seeing from the years of underfunding, and what does restoration look like in real terms for families here at Hoosiers?
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate a point I made earlier, that I am whole beside all the trauma I experienced, all the bad things I went through. I am whole because of my public school teachers, and many of them are on Facebook. So if you're watching, I love you, thank you, and I credit you. And our children need this for schools. So take, for example, at Holly's House, the team does prevention education in schools. And quite often, almost every week, children disclose when we tell them what abuse looks like. And so their teachers are their safe space. And so I will tell you, during COVID, we worried and we prayed and we did everything we could because we knew that children were locked in their home, potentially with their abuser, because in over 40% of the cases that come through, the abuser is mom's romantic partner, and in over 90%, the abuser is known to the child.
Right.
And so the public school is the safe space for the child. It's where the child is seen and loved and nurtured and pushed. And it was my public school teacher just said, Cindi, you've got a gift. You can do something. I distinctly remember, you're going to be somebody someday. That stuck in my mind. And that's one of the things that made me want to teach, that I could be the one to say to one of my students the truth of, hey, you've got something. And then that changes their life. And that's just so awesome. So public school is where our children are made. The next generation is made. And we have been, because they're children, right? And they don't know to scream and yell about it. Since 2008, the state government has been pulling more and more funding every year out of our public schools. And it's like, that's the one place that some children are safe.
Yeah.
And the people who are their safety, the teachers, are being treated terribly. So now the Attorney General in the state of Indiana has a hit list of teachers, including higher ed, of anyone who speaks out against anything that is in their ideology and tries to get them fired. If you are on Facebook, you could follow him, and it's all there and easy to see.
I've seen it.
I was just like, oh my gosh, you never know what's the thing that's going to get you on it.
Yeah.
And our teachers shouldn't live that way. They're underpaid. They're underappreciated. We've got folks who seem to think that teachers are just glorified babysitters when, oh my gosh, they sub in for so many aspects of life, of what parents should be doing.
I don't know about public schools, but as in college, this is a full-time job times 3.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I tell my students, I give all of them my cell phone number, and I'm like, you don't drive, if you're in trouble, you call me. No one's ever taken me up on it, but I have gone business clothes shopping with some of them that are like, I grew up on a farm. I don't know what I should do. I come out on a weekend to practice interviewing with them, whatever it is they need to be successful. I try to disclose a reasonable amount of things in the classroom about, like, having lost my mother and things like that. And then I've had students come to me and go, I just lost my dad right before school started. And I feel like you see me and they want to talk to me about it. Now, there are especially trained people who can handle that. Just like in our public schools, there are school counselors and things like that. But again, if you have a school of, 200 kids, chances are you're sharing a nurse and a school counselor between multiple schools. Yeah. When these children the children's needs are still going to happen. And if you don't have anybody there to meet it, it all falls on the underpaid, overworked teacher who's not trained and shouldn't have to be the one to use their small salary to keep a snack pantry so that the children in the classroom don't go hungry.
Yeah.
But they do, because again, they can't be bought. They're not making very much money, but they do it for the love. And so they should be respected and treated properly as a result and paid like a professional.
We student media has a food pantry here, and then student media budget, but I make sure that they have food. It's the same. I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, we do it because we love them.
So, your lived experience in education, as someone with a background in service and education, how does the classroom perspective shape your understanding of affordability, child welfare, and community stability?
One of the things that, and I hope this answers that question directly, but one of the things that has been on my mind recently, in fact, I just stopped at Holly's house before I came because we've had to add a little food pantry at Holly's house because we've had families that come in that are going hungry. And SNAP benefits, a large portion of SNAP benefits go to the caretaker of a child in foster care. And watching every day where our federal administration is going to the Supreme Court to try to not feed children in foster care, I can't cope. Like if I wasn't running, you asked about my why. If I wasn't running, I think I would go off the deep end because I have to do something. So anyway, we're making sure that families that come through Holly's house, because of now, if SNAP starts back up, there's still a delay. And quite often children, not quite often, but sometimes children that come through Holly's house, the offender lives in the home. The perpetrator lives in the home. So the child has to be placed in foster care, or the child has to be placed with a non-custodial parent who's not prepared to have them, right? And so we have to provide them, and we work with all of the other agencies in the community to make sure that this family has what they need to be successful, because it's immediate. You know, when we've realized, I think over the last several months, that when laws are broken by leaders, it takes forever to go through court. And that's, people are starving, and people are going without heat and going without shoes in that time span. And it's unacceptable. And so, you know, we're working to try to make sure in this community, you know, we were talking before the podcast about this community is love. This community steps up for one another. And one of the things that I think is so sad is the television, social media, different things have divided us. But if one of us was in need, it would be our neighbors that come in to take care of us.
We do. One of the things that we've discovered in on this podcast is that when the families in the area can't afford to pay their utility bills, it's the nonprofit organizations that are funded by us. Uh-huh. So we are taking care of each other. And I think it was around the number, and if I misquote myself, I will fix it in the notes. But I think it was like around the $16 million from nonprofits that was funneled towards utility bills.
Yes. And one of the points I want to make while you bring that up is there are things that are on fire, right? So people's heat getting shut off. Fortunately, we're having a warm week, but and at the same time, SNAP benefits, which is supplementary. So this notion that people aren't working, supplementary. Most people work, and they work for large corporations who don't pay them a living wage, and so they're double dipping in the government's, you know, in our tax dollars, basically. And so we've got these, and then housing, and not because we're in the same political party, but I do want to say Mayor Stephanie Terry, since she's taken office, I mean, she made a promise to increase the number of rental units. And all you have to do is try to get around downtown and you see that she's delivered big time and quickly. So we're working on that. That's a problem that can't be solved overnight, housing. But so we go to these things that are on fire, but there are nonprofits that do a lot of other things. And so, you know, selfishly, you know, wanted to highlight that at Holly's house, there is our victim services portion is partially funded by what's called VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act. And so when people go to court, they have to pay fines, and those fines all go into a chest, basically. And those funds are supposed to be redistributed to the communities where they offended as a restorative justice tool. But the federal government has impounded or withheld those funds as part of what's happened this year, right? So last year Congress promised these funds, right? And then the presidential administration changed and said, nah, we're not going to pay them out. And so in the meantime, there aren't fewer children being abused. And then our state government made the decision to cut the Division of Children's Services, which was already underfunded and underpaid and under-resourced, from 18 regional offices to 4. So when a call is made to DCS that a child is being abused, what resources do we have? And then you've got people who might be foster parents, but they can't function right now. They can't pay their bills. They can't get by. And they would rely on SNAP to feed that child. So they're like, I can't take that child because I can't feed that child. And so these children are all in limbo. So all of these horrible decisions about that to me are just cruel. They compound. And the losers are always children, people with disabilities, the elderly, and people who are stuck in poverty cycles. So the things that might be able to help them get out of poverty cycles have also been cut. So it's like, we want you to stay in poverty. And by the way, we're not going to help you while you're there. We're going to criticize you for these things. And children are not responsible for their circumstances. And so that's what lights me on fire, right? And that's, one of the reasons why I stepped up. And so we think about the utilities, and yes, that has to be addressed because it affects all of us. But I also want to draw attention to the downstream effects of all the cuts that this monopoly state government has made. And again, I want to reiterate the notion that the government should be run like a business, and a business's only job is to make money. That is so illogical. We all pay into funds that are supposed to come back out to help our communities. End of story.
Right.
It should not be buying helipads or cyber trucks.
Yeah.
It's obnoxious, and it's so laughable, and it's so galling. And that's one of the reasons why I also say treating residents with the respect they deserve. Yeah. When the lieutenant governor comes to Evansville area, went to Warwick County, and put on a show of basically trolling the residents that are there for no reason other than his own jollies, that's sick.
Yeah.
And we have to stand up. Here in southwestern Indiana, we have an ethos. We have common sense. I'm like, why would you come down here in your $100,000 truck we bought you and make fun of us and jab at us? That's insane.
So what I'm really pulling from what you're saying is that if you cut through all this noise,
yeah,
we all agree that children should be protected. Children should have access to food, and children should have access to a quality education. Yes,
and I would add one of the things that I will advocate for, and I will not shut up about it. Actually, I'll say 2 things. It's just a warning for my, hopefully, fellow senators. Every child in Indiana should have a hot breakfast and lunch at school. Period of story. That a child has a lunch debt.
Yeah, this is a problem we can solve.
This is
a problem we can solve.
This
costs us nothing.
It is not an expensive fix. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if the parents of that child make a lot of money, well, then ideally they would give some of that away back to the community, right? So we can take the reverse of, we make all the wealth go to the top, and then they'll give jobs to those of us at the bottom, right? So instead we go, what we're going to do is we're going to lift everyone up, yes, and then those at the top then are freed up to invest in the community, and we're sure children are taken care of. The second thing is the power of the prevention education. We have data, and I will tell you that, well, first let me say the point, which is that is an unfunded mandate. And so schools are just willy-nilly doing whatever they want. We have a curriculum that is evidence-based, that was paid for by a Lilly grant. So thank you, Lilly. And It's also a model that Queen Sylvia of Sweden in her World Childhood Foundation has noticed. Secondarily, we have added in-house mental health services. That is a specific PTSD reducing therapy that was created at Yale University. And we train local social workers and therapists to use this training. And it reduces the PTSD scores of children who have been abused. The numbers that we're getting, we almost don't believe them because they're in the 90% of how much reduction. The Centers for Disease Control has talked about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, as one of the largest public health crises that have faced the nation. And, we like to say, I'm a Gen Xer, and we like to say, well, I turned out okay. No, you didn't, Paul. You didn't.
I'm fine.
The only, emotion you can access is anger.
Yeah.
And you drink too much. And, you're yelling and screaming is problematic for everyone around you. So you're not okay, Paul. But at this service, again, Queen Sylvia has, our executive director, Christine Courts, has presented our results to Queen Sylvia over Zoom, and she was so impressed, and it's something that we want to be able to replicate. So again, it's this focus on a well child, because even if you don't have children, we're going to get old, right? And in our communities, our children become our leaders and our cashiers and our customer service people and our accountants. And so we owe them the best we can do in the richest country in the world.
Right.
It's hard for me to compute sometimes.
Right. All right. So let's go on to accountability and respect. So you wrote that current representatives ignore our calls.
Yeah.
They mock our voices, and they focus on out-of-state interests. Can you share examples of what residents have told you and what servant leadership means to you in practice?
Yeah. So when we're talking about not being heard, obviously the most glaring example that we have is the many times we've tried to get our 8th District Congressman to appear. And when constituents call his office and say, remind him that he works for us, not an intern, his actual full-time staff go, no, he works for the U.S. government. Ma'am, we are the U.S. government. Every single taxpayer, we the people are the U.S. government. So I think what that means is, no, he works for the party. He works for the president, and he does not. So
that's what it sounds like to me when I get those emails from him.
Oh, for sure. The emails, and I had big hopes that Todd Young would hold the line and be reasonable, and he has not been. Jim Banks is obviously just a cruel, nasty man. And so that's at the federal level, right? So at the state level, I think the biggest, we've got Ed Soliday, who is the person in charge of the Energy Committee, who said it's the same people whining and crying about, utility rates. That is disrespectful. It is dismissive, and we deserve better. Our job, if the citizens elect me, my job, I have one job, and that is to be their voice. It's not my job to, I told the party when I signed on, I might be a problem for you because what the constituents want is what I want, to a large degree. And when I say the constituents, I mean the mass of them, right? So there are going to be niche people who are not going to be happy with me on both sides. But I will do my best to serve the interests of the ones who need the voice. And
like you're saying, if we break through that noise,
yeah,
we all agree,
right?
Especially when we're talking about children, and when we're talking about protecting, we're talking about education, we're talking about food. I think just sometimes people don't understand that there's not a significant cost. It's just about a little effort.
It's about effort, and it's about really staying focused. I'm not naive enough to think that there's not going to be a lot of noise up there, and that there's not going to be niche of people knocking at the door and saying, "Oh, we want you to do this and we want you to do that," and that may or may not align. In 2025, there's no reason why I can't have a dialogue like this with constituents. Right. Mary Ellen goes live on and reviews city council notes. Why couldn't I do that at the state level? So it doesn't have to be something that you have to dig for. Again, I'm a teacher, so I want to teach what's happening, and then I want to hear feedback in real time. I don't want it to be a situation where it's like, well, I personally make this decision based on what I want. I want input.
Right. I think this is a good transition to talk about trust.
Yeah.
So you've talked about restoring respect and giving people representation they can feel, and you're touching on that right now. So what else? How else would that look like? What would that look like in your first year? What kind of things might you establish? Type of behaviors to where you're taking our voice to Indianapolis and you're telling us what's going on?
Yeah, I think that Alex Burton is setting a great model for us all right now, which is when you can to show up in the community in person. And there are constituents who don't have the means to show up at those things. So I think it's a multi-approach thing. It might be hey, we're having hearings on these things this week, and I'd love for you to take a look at those bills. Here's the link. It's all out there. Because that's how I got started in paying attention, is the federal government issue was so out of control that I was like, oh, I'm going to lose my mind. And so I was okay, I can focus on state. So I started watching the bills that were going on in the state. And so it's easy to follow once you know how to do it, but you have to have, working at a state university and being in their administration, I'm used to dealing with the red tape and getting through these things. So I could easily, because of my experience, figure out how to follow it. But I want to teach constituents how to follow it, and I want to serve it to them on a platter and go, you guys are working 2 jobs, you're raising children, you're tired, but I want you to participate in your government. I want you to have a voice. Here's what we're doing this week. If you have an opinion about any of these things, please let me know. And to be responsive to those comments. So the federal government actually used to, when we had sort of a process, do something for proposed lawmaking, and they published called the Federal Register, and people could comment. There was a 90-day comment section. And so I worked in HR during the transition to the Affordable Care Act. And so I read that Federal Register about 87 times, and I knew every line of it. And so, how would that affect the employees of USI? How do our plans already match that? There were little niche things like the definition of what a temporary employee is, because the government, oftentimes they make these decisions because you have a business person, right, that's in office who's never had to be in the weeds and deal with red tape. So they don't predict the negative consequences of what their decisions are going to bring. So asking for clarity through something like the Federal Register was how the federal government did it. We can do that at the state level in a less formal process. Yeah. And I believe each representative should be doing that. But keeping in mind, this is a part-time job. And all of us, so to run for office, you either have to work for a state employer that, there's a law that says they have to let you run, or you have to be retired / independently wealthy. So that narrows the pool. And it is a lot of work to run, to get elected, to rise above the noise and go, this is what I'm about. Please choose me or don't based on who I am and what I'm offering. And then once you get into office, I'll still have my classes to teach. And so it will be tough, but it is worth it. I probably devote 20 hours a week to Holly's house now. And, I would have to devote more during session to our constituents. But it's worth it. It's worth it because we have got to get back in this process. We see what's happened when we have allowed things to happen to us versus we make things happen.
Right. So we've talked about affordability a lot, and we've danced around lots of different things. So
I tend to get passionate, especially about children.
Yeah. So beyond utilities, families in this region are they're being squeezed not just by utility rates, and when utility rates are high, that trickles down to the cost of everything around us, but also housing, and we talked a little bit about that, child care, food security, transportation. From what you've heard at the doors, so what issues are people talking to you about? What are they telling you that they care about? Which one of these is the most prevalent?
So at the doors, I'm not hearing of course we talk about the utility bill, and it's one of those things that it's almost like everybody's like, yeah, of course,
Yeah.
And then we go on to the next things, which is, I don't know how much longer I can afford to live here, because childcare is as much as college tuition.
Yeah.
And we have got to, again, as a community, figure out a way to make that tenable for families, to make that possible for families, because 2 incomes is barely getting it. Now, if you have to take someone out, and frankly, it's going to be the women that have to come out of the workforce, then people can't make it on 2 incomes. How are they going to make it on 1? Yeah. So we have to, there's this old saying of, you can stand at the end of the river and pull people out who have drowned, or you can go back to the top and figure out why they're falling in. And so to take that metaphor a bit further, I want to go back and figure out why they're falling in. And we know some of those things. So they're telling me about the grocery prices. They're telling me about, now they've picked up a second job or a third job. They never see their kids. They're making choices like, leaving the 9-year-old in charge at home, which is not what they would choose.
Right.
And, we've gone down to 1 car. And so one of us, we switched to night shift. So the family bond is, when a family's under stress, it already, makes it difficult. But then you add more stress of taking on additional work, additional jobs, and people are at the brink and they break. Yeah. So we have to, in order to have a healthy community, we've got to address the things that are keeping people unhealthy. And that includes the affordability piece, the choosing food or medicine. Yeah. We have people dying because they can't afford their medicine. And in our community, yes. This summer, a woman who was in her 90s died in her home of heat stroke because her air conditioning was cut off. So like Sally and Logan have talked about, I would also stand behind a summer moratorium on disconnects. Yeah. And then also to make the rules where So you hear people who, I've talked to people at doors that tell me, I'm on this breathing machine, or my mother lives here with me and she's on this breathing machine and it requires electricity. And so I paid as much as I could on the bill, but they still shut my power off. I have given them medical documentation. Mm-hmm. And so it's this person who's already under a great deal of stress. And then you're also, then they're also up against a large corporation. So one of the 5 pillars with our monopoly agreement, the IURC, is accessibility, and customer service is a part of that. And so I know a corporation, customer service is overhead, and they're going to make their money no matter what. So what incentive do they have to provide outstanding customer service? Well, it's one of the 5 pillars. And so they're kind of like, well, we can't do all 5 and have multimillionaire executives. So something's got to give. And for us, for Centerpoint, we're going to have multimillionaire executives. So the rest of you are just going to have to deal.
So when we're talking to the community, 44% of us live under the Alice line, which is where people are working, but they just can't quite make ends meet. And I think that there's something that I want to say to the people that are living above above that 44%. There's not enough living wage jobs for everybody to have one. If it was, this term, this idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, if I pulled my bootstraps any harder, my boots would hit me in the face.
You do a backflip, yeah.
Yeah, and so I've worked harder than a lot of people that I know, and it's still very, very complicated for me. So when I don't really understand how to make it clear to people that we have so many people that are working hard, that we don't have a 44% of the population that are lazy. They're trying. They're out there working. I don't know how to communicate that.
And since the Reagan era, it has seeped into our DNA that this is a nation of pull yourself up by your bootstrap. That if you're not successful, there's something wrong with you.
Right.
When all of our systems are set up for us to not be successful, and you have to beat so many odds to get above that line. And it is sometimes the luck of the family you were born into. Recently I had a conversation. We had someone from a tech millionaire come in, and he was talking about, how talented USI students are. And I agree, of course. And he said, I put him up against Stanford's, students any day. And then he's talking about how he doesn't understand why they're so polite and shy, because when he was a child, his dad was an investor, and he would, at 4 years old, sit in his dad's lap and his dad would read the Wall Street Journal to him. And I just kind of looked around the room and nobody was saying anything. And I was like, none of our students had the Wall Street Journal read to them. Yeah. Like, these students are hardworking, bootstrap, first generation students. They're busting their humps. And so the fact that it didn't even occur to him, and it's not a criticism of him, and he helps our students, he gives them advice, he's a delight of a human being. But that's the thing. People who were born at the top have no clue what it's like to be at the bottom. And so the only explanation they can come up with is, well, they're just lazy, because everybody had the same opportunities I had, so they just failed.
Right.
And not being wealthy is not a moral failure.
And it's statistically and mathematically impossible
for
everybody to be wealthy.
Yeah.
I don't. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I often say if everybody that wanted a living wage job and those were available, and they went and got those jobs, who would do the jobs that they were doing? And I just don't think people think how complicated it is. I mean, it seems pretty simple. If they all of a sudden, who would make your coffee?
Who would put those jobs? Immigrants.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different conversation.
So this month, November, it's Thanksgiving, Christmas is coming, and this month families across Indiana have lost access to SNAP benefits during the federal shutdown, and I don't know if they're back yet or how long it's going to be till they get those funds. How do you expect this to affect our communities? And what do you think legislators do in the future? I know that we did not send out things that we could have done. We didn't do things that we could have done,
nope.
Which doesn't make any sense to me as we're talking about, everybody wants children to have food. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. For some reason, Indiana chose not to feed our children this month.
Yeah. So there are a variety of things that to you and me and most people who are watching and listening seem like common sense and that you would think everybody agrees with, but they don't. I have heard on more than one occasion people saying like, well, if you can't feed the kids, you shouldn't have had the kids. Right. Or, so basically shirking any responsibility to the community around us. And what we're getting from our governor is, this is my agenda. And if whatever it is not aligned with it, and protection and care of children is not aligned with our governor's agenda, period, exclamation point. It is not aligned with our current governor's agenda. And so Indiana has a surplus, and that is meant for some sort of an emergency, like SNAP benefits being withheld from the federal government, which is, by the way, our tax money that was already appropriated. Yes. Same thing with Indianapolis. That's our money. So why does he get to say, no, we're not going to feed children? Just JK, it doesn't align with his priorities. And that should, for people who actually care. And I just wonder, like, sometimes I think, who hurt you? To the people who are like, well, people should not have kids or whatever. And quite often they're the same people who are against, sex ed in schools and contraceptives and the things that would, give people more options. But it is concerning. What do you say to, there are people who say those types of things. And what I have to say to them is, I'm so sorry you feel that way, because I've had to take a stance of, I feel bad for you that you are so hard-hearted. And so what we have to do is make sure those are not the people in power. So Jim sitting in his barn saying these things, or his living room, or on his front porch, or wherever, saying things like that, or putting it on the internet, that's fine. But we can't have Jim make a decision about our tax dollars, because he's going to use cruelty as his guide, which is exactly what Braun and Beckwith, specifically Beckwith, it goes even deeper with Beckwith. And that information is coming out that will impact the type of work I do at Holly's House. I'll just say that. But the cruelty is the point. And it is to say, if you are not in the elite, you do not matter. And I'm mad as hell about that, because every child matters. Yeah. And I would say every Hoosier matters.
You're right.
Even the ones who say that no one else matters. I care about them too.
So let's go into idyllic mode, all right? So you, Logan, Sally, and Alex, you're all in your seats and you're all working together. How could that unified regional representation translate into real savings and stability for Southern Indiana?
I would argue, I love to travel, and I would argue that Evansville and the region, Posey and Warwick County, are among the best places to live for a lot of reasons. So when I come home from, I used to travel to England because I had a friend who was a flight attendant, and I got flight passes from her, and I had friends over there so I could stay for free. But I always was so happy to come home. We have so much to offer. And what's happening, the city council and the mayor, what they're doing with our downtown is what, for the 30 years I've lived in Evansville, everybody's been saying should happen. Yeah. It's finally happening. And that draws young people, young professionals that are going to come in with fresh ideas and fresh energy and desperately need that influx. And so working alongside officials in Vanderburgh and Posey and Warwick counties to bring resources to this region gives us in taking raw potential and making it something incredible. So I see things in Indianapolis, and granted, I understand, population, there are, economic factors or whatever, but there's a lot that we can still do that would make this an even better quality of life place to live. And people have been convinced, again, since the Reagan era all the way to current day, almost like we don't want high quality of life. Like if I can't have it, nobody can have it.
Yeah.
And I say, man, we've got a lot to offer.
Yeah. There's enough pie for everybody.
There's enough. It's not even a pie. It's a, so one of the first things the questions you asked me early on is, what would I do? I want to go through the budget. And I want to, I've seen the charts and graphs that they put out, but I want to see the raw numbers. I want to see exactly where our tax money is going, and to have a conversation of the leadership to say, what are our priorities? And then what we attach dollars to priorities. You cannot say that you value children and then starve them.
Right.
So you can't have it both ways. And so I think us teaming up and having a unified voice for southwestern Indiana is ideal for Indiana, because I think that this region is really representative of, I've lived in Vermilion County and Sullivan County. I lived in Posey County and then Vanderburgh. And so I've lived some different places, but I think we have a wide representation here of what it's like to be a Hoosier all over the state. And so I think that we could represent not just this area, but the state well.
I think that maybe we could convince, if somehow we could convince them of this ideology, that if everybody does well, the people at the top will do even better.
That's right.
It only makes sense that if I have a little more money to spend on extra things, that money's probably going to go to the do-bops that you make, whatever it is that you make. I might spend money on that if I had a little extra.
Trickle-down economics by evidence, not just scientific evidence, but with our own eyeballs, doesn't work.
It's the opposite.
It's the opposite. And yet people are still wedded to trickle-down economics for some reason. They're like, I've committed to this, and I know it's wrong, and I know it's a failure in my soul. But it's so much of my personality now that I have to ride it to the grave.
Yeah.
And there just has to be enough of us with some common sense to go, hey, stop putting coins in a machine that doesn't work.
Right. Okay. So last question.
Okay.
So exhausted voters.
Yeah.
For residents who are overwhelmed, under pressure, and uncertain about politics making a difference. I mean, we have a voting problem here.
Oh yeah.
So we have to get them to care to even vote.
Yeah.
So what do you want them to hear from you right now?
If you feel frustrated and you're overwhelmed, everybody has to do something. And if that something, all of us are in different positions to do things, but that something has got to be to turn up to vote. Even if you've watched this and you're like, I wouldn't vote for my own mother if she was like Cindi, don't like her. Fine. I don't have to be your candidate, but we should have a voter turnout that reflects our population, because again, they're still taking our money. And so what happens is it's like getting robbed on the street and then never finding out who took your money, because you didn't try. Yeah. And yes, our voting lines are too long. And yes, we don't have enough representation. And yes, so, early voting is great. And being able to vote at any location is great. But it's not enough, because we've got to get everybody to turn out. And again, it's not because I think, that's because I want everybody to vote for me. It's that I want everybody to be heard. And that is right now how our democracy works. And we're this close to losing that.
I feel that.
So if the last week hadn't kind of gone down, we were on a trajectory, and we might still be, to have, potentially military personnel at our polling stations, potentially, the voting system, Dominion voting systems, was bought by I believe an Argentinian company, which just received $40 billion from the federal government. And so our elections are on the line, and this is the one thing that we, the people, I think everybody can agree on. I get to vote.
Yes.
And so we need to be a unified voice to say, I get to vote. And whoever you vote for is between you and your God. It's not anybody else's business. But so resources. Both political parties here in town provide rides to the polls. And there are childcare options. There's mail-in voting, which people who are in the military, people who are shut in, they deserve the right to have their voice heard as well. So we cannot any longer stand by and be silent. If you don't hear anything else that I've said blathering over this, God knows how long I've been carrying on, you must vote.
Yeah, we must vote.
We must. But it's not only our civic responsibility, but it is our very duty as a U.S. citizen to vote. And, they was, if you don't vote, you can't complain. Well, if you don't vote, then you might as well just send your money, to a stranger because you have no control over it at that point, right? So.
Well, Cindi, I really appreciate you being on Gaslit, The Power of Story. And it was a pleasure having you, and I wish you the best of luck. And you got my vote.
Oh, thank you, Tommy. Right. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching.
That was my conversation with Cindi Clayton. You just heard how policy, power, and profit collide in very specific places. A student who can't afford to stay after graduation, a foster parent trying to feed a child without SNAP, a teacher holding a classroom together with snacks out of their own paycheck, a child sitting in a forensic interview room at Holly's house because every adult around them failed to keep them safe. You also heard something else. This didn't happen by accident. The utility monopoly isn't an accident. The starving of public schools isn't an accident. The cuts to child services and the withholding of VOCA funds aren't accidents. They're the result of choices made in Indianapolis over years, choices that can be changed, but only if different people are sitting in those seats. Cindi is clear about what she's bringing to the table: a refusal to take money from energy companies, a lifetime of work inside classrooms and child advocacy, and a basic, non-negotiable belief that every child in Indiana deserves safety, food, and a real shot, not as charity, but as a baseline. If you're listening to this and feeling overwhelmed, here's the hard truth and the hopeful truth at the same time. Local races like hers are where the math is smallest and the impact is the biggest. The same people who vote on utility oversight, school funding, and child welfare are the ones whose names appear in the down ballot section that most people never get to. So, here's what I'm going to ask you to do after this episode. Check your registration. Learn who represents you at a state level. Show up when it's time to vote. And bring someone with you. Change doesn't start in a presidential year. It starts in school board races, city council chambers, and state house seats that quietly decide whether your kid eats at school, whether your bill gets shut off, and whether a child in crisis has anywhere safe to go. This has been Gaslit, The Power of Story. I'm Tommy Hausman. Thank you for listening and for refusing to stay silent.